Elias Okafor never told his wife he was worth $40 million. Not on the day he married her. Not on the day their son was born. Not on the morning she stood in their kitchen in Victoria Island, watching rain hit the lagoon, and told him quietly that she felt like she had disappeared inside this marriage. He listened. He nodded. He said he understood. Then he drove to his office and signed a contract worth $8 million and did not think about what she had said until 3 days later. That was the man he was. That was the problem. But the decision he made on a Tuesday evening in October, sitting alone in a house that cost more than most people in Lagos would earn in 4 lifetimes, that decision would shake his family to its foundation. It would cost him everything he thought he understood about his wife, his mother, his brother, and the people who had surrounded him with smiles and called it love. He gave away his cars. He froze his accounts. He told his wife the business had collapsed. Then he waited to see who would stay. What he discovered over the next 12 months would leave him unable to speak at the end of it. Not from sadness. Not from anger. But from the particular silence that comes over a man when he realizes he almost destroyed the most valuable thing he ever had, and he almost did it while looking directly at it. This is that story. Elias Okafor was born in Nui, in Anambra State, the second son of a mechanic and a seamstress who worked 6 days a week and rested on Sunday only because the church required it. His father repaired engines in a concrete shed behind their compound. His mother sewed school uniforms on a machine that shook the table when it ran. They were not poor in the way that breaks people. They were poor in the way that teaches people. Every resource was counted. Every opportunity was studied. Nothing was wasted and nothing was assumed. Elias left Nui at 17 with a scholarship to study economics in Lagos and a bag his mother had packed herself, folding each item with the care of a woman sending something irreplaceable into the world. He did not go home for 8 months. Not because he had forgotten home, but because the bus fare was money he could not afford to spend on sentiment. He called every Sunday from a phone booth near campus and spoke to his mother for exactly 5 minutes because that was what the coins allowed. He graduated first in his class. He found work at a financial consulting firm in Lagos. He saved. He invested. He made mistakes that cost him 2 years of savings and then made decisions that earned it back in 6 months. He was 29 when he registered his first company. 32 when it turned profitable. 36 when a European logistics firm paid him $4 million to acquire 40% of his shipping operation. He reinvested every naira. By 40, Elias Okafor was worth more than most people in 3 Nigerian states would see across 3 generations. He owned a shipping logistics firm, a real estate portfolio across Accra, Nairobi, and London, a tech company in Abuja valued at $60 million, and a grain processing plant in Anambra that employed 400 people from villages where his father had once begged for engine repair work. He had built all of it. With his own hands and his own mind and the stubbornness his mother called a curse until it started producing results she called a blessing. Then he married Adiz. She was a schoolteacher from Enugu, the daughter of a retired civil servant and a woman who sold fabric at the Ogbete market. She was 32 years old, she wore no jewelry to the dinner where they met, and she spent 20 minutes arguing with Elias about why billionaires who built schools in Africa put their names on the gates instead of books in the classrooms. She said a man who needed his name on a building was a man who did not trust his work to speak for itself. Elias had not been spoken to like that in 6 years. He called her the next day. They married 14 months later in Enugu, not Lagos, because Adiz said her mother's friends deserved to see her married and she was not moving her wedding to suit business calendars. Elias agreed. He liked that she held her ground not from pride but from love. It was a rare thing in his world. Most people who surrounded him had learned to agree with him because agreement was safer than the alternative. The first years were good. Then they became quiet. Adiz stopped teaching when their son Emeka arrived. The decision was never made out loud. It assembled itself slowly from impossible logistics and a baby who needed more than schedules could provide. She stayed home. She raised Emeka. She built a life inside large quiet rooms and waited for her husband to come home from a world she was no longer part of. Elias worked. He always worked. His mornings started before she woke. His evenings ended after she had carried Emeka to bed and fallen asleep with her hand on the boy's back. Elias would stand in the doorway of that room sometimes, watching the two of them breathe in the dark, and feel something he had no language for. Not distance. Not regret. The awareness that something important was happening and he was observing it instead of living inside it. His mother visited in the 3rd year of the marriage and stayed 2 weeks. On the last evening, she sat beside him on the veranda and looked at the lagoon. "You provide well," she said. "Your father also provided well." Elias waited. He knew his mother's pauses the way he knew weather. "Your father was always one moment too late." She turned to look at her son. "By the time he understood what we needed, we had already learned to need it from somewhere else." She paused again. "I'm not saying you are your father. I'm saying the blood carries things. Watch what yours is carrying." He thought about those words for weeks. Then came the night he stopped thinking and started seeing. He came home early from a meeting that finished ahead of schedule. He found Adiz at the dining table alone. Emeka was asleep. The food was covered. She was sitting with tea that had gone cold, her hands wrapped around the cup, looking at nothing in particular. He sat across from her and asked what she was thinking. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said she had been thinking about a girl named Chisholm, a student she had taught in Enugu who could not read for 2 full years and then one morning picked up a book and read an entire page without stopping. She said that moment had felt like something she built with her own hands. She said she had been wondering whether Elias knew that story, whether she had told him, whether he had ever asked. He did not remember her telling it. He could not remember asking. He sat with the silence of that. The cold tea. The covered food. The woman across from him who had once argued about billionaires and building names with the fire of someone who knew exactly who she was, sitting now with the stillness of someone who had been quietly losing that certainty for years. That night Elias sat alone in his study after she had gone to bed. He had built systems for everything. Risk models. Market forecasts. Acquisition strategies. He could identify the moment a company began to fail before the numbers confirmed it. He was known for this. It was his greatest professional skill. He sat in his study and turned that skill on his marriage. And in the quiet of that room, surrounded by $40 million worth of evidence that he was exceptional at building things, he asked himself the question that changed everything. If tomorrow morning Adiz woke up and there was nothing, no house in Victoria Island, no driver, no account she could draw from, no name that opened doors and silenced rooms. If he was just a man, an ordinary man with ordinary means and no guarantee of comfort, would she stay? He did not know. And the not knowing felt more dangerous than anything he had faced in 20 years of business. More dangerous than failed investments. More dangerous than hostile acquisitions. More dangerous than the year the markets collapsed and he had to make decisions in 72 hours that would define the next decade. He opened his desk drawer. He took out a notepad. He wrote 4 words at the top of the page. Who stays without reason? Then he began to plan. The plan took 3 weeks to build and 1 phone call to set in motion. Elias did not involve lawyers. He did not involve accountants. He involved one man. His oldest friend, Chidi, who had known him since the phone booth days at the university, who had watched him build everything from a concrete floor up, and who was perhaps the only person on earth who could hear what Elias was proposing without immediately recommending a psychiatrist. Chidi listened to the entire plan on a Wednesday afternoon sitting across from Elias in a restaurant they had eaten at for 15 years. He did not interrupt. When Elias finished, Chidi picked up his glass, drank slowly, set it down, and said one thing. Your wife is going to make you pay for this for the rest of your life. Elias said he understood. Chidi said he would help. The structure was clean. All company accounts would be redirected through a holding entity Chidi would manage. The properties would remain in the portfolio but under a separate legal identity that could not be traced back to Elias directly. The cars would go. The driver would be let go with full severance and a private explanation that covered the arrangement without revealing it. The house in Victoria Island would be given up. Elias would tell Adiz the business had failed. Not gradually. Not with technical explanations she could investigate. A clean collapse. Bad partnerships. Government regulatory action, over-leveraged debt. The kind of failure that happens fast and leaves nothing behind. They would move to a 2-bedroom flat in Surulere. Elias had chosen Surulere deliberately. It was the neighborhood where he had rented his first room in Lagos at 17 years old. He knew its streets. He knew its pace. He knew what life felt like there, the sound of generators at night, the smell of pepper soup from the buka on the corner, the way neighbors knew each other's business because the walls were thin and the yards were shared. It was an honest neighborhood. It would be an honest test. He rehearsed the conversation with Adiz 4 times in his head before he had it. He sat her down on a Sunday evening after Emeka had gone to bed. He told her everything he had prepared. The business partner who had defrauded the shipping company. The regulatory investigation that had frozen the Abuja accounts. The London properties that had been used as collateral and were now in the hands of creditors. He told her the Victoria Island house had 30 days before it would need to be vacated. He told her he was sorry. He told her he would find a way back. He told her he understood if she needed time to process what he was saying. Adiz sat across from him and did not speak for a long time. Then she asked one question. "Are you healthy?" He said yes. She nodded slowly. Then she stood up, went to the kitchen, came back with 2 cups of tea, set one in front of him, and sat back down. "We will figure it out," she said. "Tell me what you need me to do." Elias looked at his wife across the table. At the woman who had just been told that $40 million had evaporated. Who had just been told that the house, the cars, the accounts, the life she had built herself around for 4 years was gone. And her first question had been about his health. Her first action had been to make tea. He almost ended the plan right there. He did not. Because he told himself that one response on one evening proved nothing. That people were capable of grace in the first moment of shock and cruelty in the months that followed. He had seen this in business. The partners who shook hands warmly and then disappeared when the numbers turned. He needed to see not how Adiz responded to bad news but how she lived inside it. How she treated him when the days stretched long and the money stayed gone and the life they had built showed no sign of returning. He needed to see who she was in the ordinary moments. Not the dramatic ones. They moved to Surulere on a Friday morning. The flat was clean but small. 2 bedrooms with ceiling fans that rattled in the heat. A kitchen with a 2-burner gas cooker and a refrigerator that hummed loudly and kept things cold but not cold enough. A sitting room with a window that looked out onto a narrow street where children played in the afternoons and traders pushed carts in the mornings. Elias had furnished it simply. A bed, a table for chairs, a small sofa. Nothing that would have been out of place in the home of a man rebuilding from nothing. Emeka was 4 years old. He did not understand what had happened. He understood that his room was smaller now and that his bicycle had not come with them and that his father was home more than before. The last part he seemed to like. He followed Elias around the flat on weekends with the focused attention of a small boy who had been given unexpected access to someone usually unavailable. Adiz enrolled Emeka in a local nursery school 2 streets away. She found it herself, walked there herself, spoke to the headmistress herself, and came home and told Elias she thought the teachers were good even if the building needed paint. She said children learned from people, not from walls. Then she unpacked the kitchen. She did not complain about the refrigerator. She did not mention the Victoria Island house. She did not call her mother for 3 days, and when she finally called, Elias listened from the hallway to what she said. She told her mother they were going through a difficult time. She said Elias was working to fix things. She said she was fine. She did not cry on the phone. She did not ask her mother for money. When the call ended, she went back to the kitchen and finished making dinner. Elias wrote in his notepad that evening. First week. She has not complained once. She has not called her family to report my failure. She asked about the nursery school's teachers before she asked about the fees. He paused before writing the last line. He wrote it anyway. I do not deserve her. Then he closed the notepad. His brother Tibena called in the second week. Tibena was 3 years older than Elias and had spent most of his adult life adjacent to his younger brother's success. Not working within it. Adjacent to it. He attended the launches and the dinners. He called when there were opportunities to discuss, which meant opportunities that required Elias's money and Tibena's participation. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had learned that proximity to success was easier than building it yourself and had made his peace with that arrangement. He came to Surulere on a Tuesday evening without calling first. He stood in the doorway of the flat and looked around with an expression Elias recognized from boardrooms. The assessment of a man calculating what something was worth. "This is where you are living," Tebena said. Elias said yes. Tebena stepped inside. He sat on the small sofa and looked at the ceiling fan and then at his brother. He said he had heard things were bad. He said he had contacts in Abuja who might be able to help with the regulatory issue if Elias could provide certain documentation. He said he knew people at 2 banks who owed him favors. He said all of this quickly, in the tone of a man presenting value, and then he got to the point. He needed 3 million naira. There was a land deal in Port Harcourt that was time-sensitive. He had always planned to approach Elias as a partner in the investment. He understood the timing was not ideal. But the opportunity would close by the end of the month. Elias looked at his brother for a long moment. He said he had nothing to give. Tebena's expression shifted. Not dramatically. The way light shifts when a cloud moves. He said he understood. He said of course he understood. He stayed for 20 more minutes, talking about other things, family things, the way people talk when they are waiting to see if a door reopens. Then he left. He did not call again for 6 weeks. Elias wrote in his notepad. Tebena. 2nd week. Came with a land deal. Left when the money was confirmed gone. Did not ask how Adiz was managing. Did not ask about Emeka. He underlined the last 2 lines. The months that followed had a rhythm. Elias found work as a business consultant working under a false professional identity Chidi had constructed. He earned enough to cover the flat, the school fees, the food. Not comfortably. Enough. Some weeks the calculation was tight and he sat with the gas bill and the grocery list and made decisions he had not made since he was 22 years old. Adiz went back to teaching. She found a position at a private primary school in Surulere, 20 minutes from the flat. She came home in the evenings with chalk dust on her sleeves and stories about her students. She told Elias about a boy named Femi who could solve mathematics problems faster than she could write them on the board but could not sit still long enough to complete a test. She said she was working on it. She said every child was a system that needed understanding before it needed correction. She said this the way she used to talk in Enugu. With certainty. With purpose. With the voice of a woman who knew who she was. Elias noticed this. He wrote it down. She is herself again, he wrote. More than she has been in years. I think the house in Victoria Island was quieter than she let me know. On a Friday evening in the 4th month, Adiz came home from school to find the gas had run out. There was no money left until the consulting payment cleared on Monday. She stood in the kitchen looking at the empty cylinder for a moment. Then she walked to the woman next door, a trader named Mrs. Fashola who sold provisions from her sitting room and borrowed a small amount of cooking gas on credit. She came back, cooked rice and stew, fed Emeka, fed Elias, and when Elias tried to apologize she shook her head. We are not in a position to waste energy on apology, she said. We are in a position to eat rice and plan Monday. Elias went to bed that night and lay in the dark listening to the ceiling fan and the street sounds below and felt something move in his chest that he had not felt since the phone booth days at university. Not shame. Not exactly. Something more honest than shame. The recognition that this woman was stronger than the life he had given her had required her to be. That he had surrounded her with comfort and in doing so had hidden from himself how extraordinary she was. He thought about ending the plan again. He thought about it for a long time in the dark. Then he thought about Tebena's face in the doorway. About the 6 weeks of silence after the money was confirmed gone. About the question he had written on the first page of his notepad. Who stays without reason? He needed to know how many people in his life had a reason. He was beginning to understand that the answer was going to be the most important thing he had ever learned. The 6th month arrived with harmattan winds that pushed dust through every gap in the flat's windows and left a fine gray film on every surface by morning. Adiz wiped the windowsills each day without comment. She stuffed old cloth into the gaps where the wind came through. She bought a small bottle of eucalyptus oil from Mrs. Fashola and put drops of it in a bowl of warm water near Emeka's bed because the dry air was making the boy cough at night. She did these things with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had grown up understanding that comfort was not delivered. It was constructed, daily, from whatever materials were available. Elias watched all of it. He was always watching now. Not with suspicion. With something closer to grief. The grief of a man who realizes he has been looking at something for years without seeing it. Adiz had always been this person. Capable and steady and rooted in a way that had nothing to do with the house she lived in or the account she drew from. He had not created this woman. He had simply been lucky enough to stand near her, and he had spent 4 years mistaking proximity for understanding. He wrote in his notepad on a Wednesday evening in the 6th month. She has not asked me once when things will return to normal. She has not used the word before in any sentence about our life. She is living in the present with a completeness I have never managed in 41 years. He stopped writing. Then he added one more line. I have been testing her. I think she has been teaching me. The trouble came from a direction he had not fully anticipated. Adiz's mother arrived on a Thursday morning without warning. Mama Nwosu was 67 years old, small in the way that certain powerful things are small, dense with opinion and unwilling to soften it for the comfort of people who should have known better. She had taken a bus from Enugu to Lagos, a 7-hour journey, because her daughter had not been calling as frequently as before and the calls that came were shorter than usual and something in Adiz's voice had told her what words had not. She stood in the doorway of the Surulere flat with a travel bag over one shoulder and looked at the sitting room the way a doctor looks at a patient, measuring, categorizing, drawing conclusions. She greeted Elias with the particular warmth of a woman who had decided to be civil before she had decided anything else. Then she went to the kitchen with Adiz and closed the door. Elias sat in the sitting room and listened to the murmur of their voices. He could not hear words. He could hear tone. Mama Nwosu's voice moved in short direct lines. Adiz's voice was lower, steadier. At one point there was a silence that lasted long enough to mean something. Then Adiz's voice again, quiet and firm. Mama Nwosu stayed for 4 days. On the second evening she sat beside Elias on the small sofa after Emeka was in bed and Adiz was washing up in the kitchen. She sat with the careful posture of a woman who had something to say and was measuring how much of it to release. She said she had not come to make trouble. Elias said he knew. She said she had come because her daughter was her daughter and a mother did not stop being a mother because her child was married. Elias said he understood. Then Mama Nwosu turned and looked at him directly. She had eyes that had seen enough of life to make evasion feel pointless. She said, "This is not the man I gave my daughter to." Elias kept his face still. She said, "The man I gave my daughter to filled a room when he walked into it. Not with noise. With certainty." She said, "The man sitting beside me now looks like a man carrying something he has not told his wife about." She let that sit in the air between them. Elias said he was going through a difficult period. He said he was working to rebuild. He said Adiz was managing better than he deserved. Mama Nwosu looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something that he would write down that night and read many times in the months that followed. She said, "My daughter married you when you had everything. Any woman can do that. Watch what she does when you have nothing. Then ask yourself whether you deserve what you are seeing." She stood up, smoothed her wrapper and went to bed. Elias sat alone in the sitting room for a long time after. On the 4th day, before her bus back to Enugu, Mama Nwosu pulled Adiz aside in the bedroom. Elias was in the kitchen with Emeka. He heard his mother-in-law's voice drop low and then heard Adiz say clearly, "I am not leaving my husband, Mama. He is a good man in a hard season. Good men deserve their wives in hard seasons." The bus pulled away at noon. Elias stood at the window watching the street return to its ordinary rhythm after the taxi carrying Mama Nwosu disappeared around the corner. He felt something press against the inside of his chest. Not guilt. Guilt was too simple for what he felt. Something larger. The understanding that the woman in the kitchen behind him had just defended him to her mother not because she had to, not because leaving was not an option, but because she believed what she said. He is a good man in a hard season. She believed it without knowing it was not true. He went to his notepad. He wrote Mama Nwosu's words. Then below them he wrote Adiz's words. Then he put the pen down and did not write anything else that evening. The ninth month brought a different kind of pressure. Word had reached certain circles in Lagos that Elias Okafor's business had failed. In a city where information moved faster than traffic, this was inevitable. What surprised Elias was not that people knew but who responded and how. 3 former business associates reached out. One sent a message through a mutual contact expressing sympathy and asking casually whether Elias still held any interest in the Abuja tech company that had been valued at 60 million. The message was carefully worded. It did not ask for anything directly. It simply positioned the sender as someone available should opportunities arise. Elias read it twice, recognized the architecture of professional opportunism, and did not respond. The second associate, a man named Rodamai who had attended Elias's wedding and given a speech about friendship and integrity that had moved 3 people to tears, called directly. He spent 4 minutes asking how Elias was managing. Then he spent 11 minutes explaining a new venture he was developing and how Elias's experience and network, even now, even in his current situation, could be valuable. He used the phrase human capital 3 times. He did not offer anything. He arrived looking for something and left with nothing and did not call again. The third was different. A woman named Blessing Adeyemi, who ran a small NGO that Elias had funded quietly for 3 years, called on a Tuesday morning. She asked how he was. She asked how Adiz was. She asked how Emeka was adjusting to the new school. Then she said she had a contact at a consulting firm in Lagos who was looking for someone with Elias's background in logistics and might be able to offer something that would help while he rebuilt. She asked if she could share his name. She did not ask for anything. She offered the only thing she had. A contact. A door. Elias wrote all 3 names in his notepad. Rodamai, he wrote. 11 minutes about himself. Blessing. 3 names asked about before her own business was mentioned. The pattern in the notepad was becoming impossible to ignore. The people who asked about him were almost always the people who had the least to gain from his recovery. The people who arrived looking were almost always the people whose connection to him had always been transactional even when it wore the face of friendship. He began to understand that the test he was running was not only about Adiz. He was learning the architecture of his entire world. Then came the evening that broke something open in him permanently. It was a Saturday in the 10th month. Adiz had been at school for a marking session that ran late. Elias was home with Emeka. The boy was 5 now, growing fast, all legs and questions. He had adapted to Surulere with the complete flexibility of a child who measures the quality of a place by the people in it rather than the size of the rooms. He had friends on the street. He knew the name of Mrs. Fashola's youngest daughter. He chased lizards in the yard with a focused dedication that Elias found quietly magnificent. They were sitting together on the floor of the sitting room. Emeka was drawing. Elias was watching him draw. Emeka looked up from his paper and said, "Daddy, are we poor now?" Elias looked at his son. He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He said, "We have less money than before." Emeka considered this. Then he said, "Mummy said it doesn't matter because we have each other and each other is the expensive part." Elias looked at his son for a long moment. He said, "Your mother is right." Emeka nodded with the satisfaction of a child whose information has been confirmed by a reliable source. Then he went back to his drawing. Elias sat on the floor of the Surulere flat and felt something shift inside him that had been locked in place for a very long time. Not a dramatic shift. The kind that happens quietly, the way a door that has been stuck finally releases from its frame and opens without effort, as though it was never really locked at all, as though it was only waiting for the right moment and the right silence and a 5-year-old boy saying his mother's words back to him on a Saturday afternoon. Each other is the expensive part. He had spent 12 months testing his wife. He had spent 41 years failing to understand her. He went to his desk that evening after Emeka was asleep. He took out the notepad. He turned to the first page where he had written 4 words the night the plan began. Who stays without reason? He read those words for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Chidi. He said, "It is time to end this." Chidi was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been waiting for this call for 10 months. Elias said he needed 2 weeks to prepare. He needed to bring his family together. He needed to do this properly because what he had done was not a small thing and the truth deserved to be told in a way that honored the people who had lived inside the lie without knowing it. Chitty said he would have everything ready. Elias put the phone down. He looked at the ceiling fan turning slowly in the warm night air. He looked at the blue curtains Adiz had sewn herself from fabric she bought at the Tejuosho market in the 3rd month because the flat's windows had nothing on them and she said a home needed something between itself and the world. She had sewn curtains for a flat she did not know was temporary. She had made it a home without being asked. He picked up the notepad one last time and wrote on the final page. She did not stay because of the money. She did not stay because leaving was impossible. She stayed because she is the kind of woman who believes a good man in a hard season deserves his wife beside him. She stayed because she is who she is. Not who I needed her to be. Who she already was before I met her and will be long after I am gone. He closed the notepad. Outside, the harmattan had softened into the first warm breath of the season turning. Somewhere on the street below, a radio played a song he did not recognize. A child laughed. A door opened and closed. The ordinary sounds of a neighborhood that did not know a billionaire was living inside it, learning things his $40 million had never been able to teach him. 2 weeks, he told himself. Then the truth. The invitation went out on a Sunday. Elias called each person himself. No assistant. No message passed through Chitty. His own voice, his own words, his own request. He called his mother in Nui first. Then his brother Tabena. Then Adiz's mother in Enugu. Then Blessing Adeyemi. Then Rodamai. Then the business associate who had asked about the Abuja tech company through a mutual contact. He told each of them the same thing. He was gathering the people closest to him at a house in Victoria Island on Saturday afternoon. He had something important to say. He asked them to come. He did not tell Adiz about the calls. He told her only that he wanted to take her and Emeka somewhere on Saturday. That there was something he needed to show her. She asked no questions. She ironed Emeka's shirt the night before and set out her own dress and went to sleep beside Elias in the narrow bed in the Surulere flat as she had done for 10 months without complaint. He lay awake for a long time listening to her breathe. He had rehearsed what he was going to say many times across many evenings. He had written it down and crossed it out and written it again. He had tried formal versions and simple versions and versions that began with apology and versions that began with explanation. None of them felt honest enough for what he had done. None of them carried the full weight of 12 months of deliberate deception visited upon a woman who had responded to every day of it with a grace he had not earned and did not deserve. In the end he decided he would not rehearse. He would simply tell the truth. In the order it happened. Without dressing it in language designed to make himself look better than he was. Saturday arrived with clear skies and the kind of warm Lagos morning that feels like a promise. Adiz dressed Emeka. She wore a yellow dress she had bought secondhand from a stall near the Surulere market, paid for with 3 weeks of careful saving from her teaching salary. She had said nothing about the dress when she brought it home. She had simply hung it in the wardrobe and it had appeared on her body this morning, clean and pressed and bright as the day outside. Elias looked at her standing in the doorway of the flat ready to leave and felt the full weight of everything he had done and everything he was about to do settle across his shoulders simultaneously. They took a taxi to Victoria Island. Adiz watched the neighborhoods change through the window as they drove. Surulere giving way to Lagos Island, the density of the city thinning gradually into the wider roads and higher gates of Victoria Island. Her face was quiet, not anxious. The face of a woman comfortable enough in her own thoughts to sit inside a journey without needing to fill it with words. Emeka fell asleep against her arm. The taxi turned into a familiar street and stopped in front of a familiar gate. Adiz looked at the gate. She looked at the house number. She turned to look at Elias. He paid the driver and got out and opened her door. She stepped out slowly, Emeka stirring awake against her shoulder, and stood on the pavement looking at the house where she had lived for 4 years before Surulere. The Victoria Island house. The house she had been told creditors had taken. The house that was standing in front of her now with its gate freshly painted and its garden trimmed and lights on behind every window. Elias, she said. Her voice was very quiet. He said, "Come inside. I will explain everything inside." The sitting room was full. His mother Margaret sat in the corner chair she had always preferred when she visited, upright and watchful. Tebena stood near the window with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had been told less than he expected when he arrived and was still assembling the meaning of that. Mama Nwosu sat on the sofa with her travel bag at her feet, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes moving between her daughter and her son-in-law with the careful attention of a woman who had traveled 7 hours because something told her to be present for whatever this was. Blessing Adeyemi sat near the door, calm and composed. Rodamai sat across the room wearing a smile that did not fully understand yet what it was smiling at. The business associate who had inquired about the Abuja company sat beside him, already recalibrating. Chidi stood at the back of the room. He caught Elias's eye and gave a single nod. Adiz walked in holding Emeka's hand and stopped when she saw the room full of people. She looked at her mother. Mama Nwosu looked back at her with eyes that said, "I knew before you did, my daughter, but I needed you to see it yourself." Elias stood at the center of the room. He did not clear his throat. He did not offer a preamble. He simply began. He said, 12 months ago I sat in the study of this house and asked myself a question I did not know how to answer any other way. He said the question was whether the people in my life were here because of who I am or because of what I have. He said he had been unable to tell the difference from the inside. He said he needed to see it from the outside. He said he had engineered a collapse that did not exist. He said the business had not failed. The accounts had not been frozen. The properties had not gone to creditors. The money was where it had always been. Every word he had told them about financial ruin had been a deliberate lie constructed to see who would stay and who would leave and who would arrive looking for something and who would arrive offering something and what each person's first question would be when they believed he had nothing left to give them. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the air has changed and no one has yet decided how to respond to the new air. Tebena unfolded his arms. His jaw tightened. He looked at the floor. Rodamai's smile collapsed slowly like a building whose foundation has been removed from underneath it. The business associate straightened in his chair and looked at his hands. Mama Nwosu exhaled a long breath through her nose and looked at her daughter. Adiz had not moved. She stood in the center of the room holding Emeka's hand, her yellow dress bright in the morning light coming through the windows, her face doing something Elias could not fully read from where he was standing. It was not the face of a woman about to cry. It was not the face of a woman about to shout. It was the face of a woman absorbing something enormous and deciding quietly what shape she was going to hold while she absorbed it. Elias turned to face her directly. He said he needed to speak to her specifically. He said he had watched her for 12 months from the closest possible distance. He had watched her tell her mother she was not leaving her husband because good men deserved their wives in hard seasons. He had watched her sew curtains for a flat she did not know was temporary because she said a home needed something between itself and the world. He had watched her borrow cooking gas on credit and come back and make dinner and tell him they were not in a position to waste energy on apology. He had watched her go back to teaching and come home with chalk on her sleeves and stories about children who needed understanding before they needed correction. He said he had written all of it down. He reached into his jacket and took out the notepad. 12 months of dates and names and words and silences. He walked across the room and placed it in Adiz's free hand. He said every page with her name on it was full. He said the pages with other names were not. He said he owed her an apology that language was not large enough to contain, but he was going to attempt it anyway because she deserved to hear him try. He said, "I lied to you for 12 months. I watched you carry a weight I had manufactured and I let you carry it because I was afraid and I did not know another way to see the truth. I was wrong. Not strategically wrong. Not wrong in judgment. Wrong in the way that matters most. Wrong in my treatment of a person who had never given me reason to doubt her and who proved across 365 days that she was more than I had understood and better than I deserved. I am sorry. I am more sorry than I know how to say in a room full of people, and I will spend the rest of my life saying it in private if you allow me that." The room remained still. Adiz looked down at the notepad in her hand. She turned it over once. She did not open it. Then she looked up at Elias. When she spoke, her voice was steady and low, and it carried the particular weight of a woman who has decided what she wants to say and is saying it without performance. She said, The room broke its stillness in a single breath. Elias stared at her. She said, "Not at the beginning. Not the first month. But I am my mother's daughter and my mother raised me to read rooms and read people and read the space between what a man says and what his face is doing when he says it." She said, "By the third month I knew the flat was not the end of your resources. A man who has lost everything does not move through loss the way you moved through it. You were observing. You were measuring. You had the stillness of a man running an experiment, not the chaos of a man surviving a disaster." She said, "I did not say anything because I understood what you were asking." Elias said nothing. He could not speak. She said, "You were asking whether I was here for you or for what you provided. You were asking the question you did not know how to ask with words. And I decided that the most honest answer I could give you was not to confront the question but to simply live inside it. To be exactly who I am every day and let that be the answer." She paused. She said, "I sewed those curtains because the flat needed curtains. I borrowed the gas because Emeka needed to eat. I went back to teaching because I needed to be myself again, and the hard season gave me a reason to do what I should have done years ago. None of it was for your test. It was for my life. That is who I am. That is who I have always been. Your test did not reveal me to you. Your test revealed you to yourself." The room was completely silent. Mama Nwosu pressed her lips together and looked at the wall with the expression of a woman who is choosing not to say "I told you so" only because the moment is too important for it. Margaret Okafor sat very still in her corner chair with her hands in her lap and her eyes on her son and something in her face that was not quite pride and not quite grief but lived in the space between them. Tebena looked at the floor. He had not spoken since the revelation. He would not speak for a long time. What he was sitting with was his own reflection and it was not comfortable and he knew it and there was nothing to say that would make it more comfortable so he said nothing. Rodamai stood up and said he needed to get going. He said it quietly and without meeting anyone's eyes and he left the room in the house and drove away in his car and the particular quality of his departure told every person remaining exactly what they needed to know about him. The business associate left shortly after. The door closed behind him with the soft finality of an ending that had been coming for some time. Blessing stayed. Chidi stayed. Margaret stayed. Mama Nwosu stayed. Tebena stayed, sitting with his silence and whatever reckoning it was producing in him. And Adiz stayed. She stood in the center of the room in her yellow dress with the notepad in one hand and Emeka's hand in the other, and she looked at her husband and she said one final thing. She said, "I want to go home." Elias looked at her. He said, "This is home. We can move back today. Everything is as it was." Adiz shook her head slowly. She said, "I do not mean this house." She looked around the Victoria Island sitting room with its high ceilings and its wide windows and its evidence of $40 million arranged across every surface. She said, "I mean I want to go back to Surulere tonight. I want to sleep in the flat one more time. I want to wake up tomorrow morning and make breakfast on the two-burner cooker and hear Mrs. Fashola's radio through the wall and walk Emeka to school on the street where he learned the name of every dog and every child." She said, "I want to leave that place the way it deserves to be left. With gratitude. Not running from it." She said, "We can come back here the day after tomorrow. But tonight I want to go back and say goodbye properly to the home we made when we thought we had nothing." Elias looked at his wife for a long moment. Then he nodded. He said, "We will go tonight." They said goodbye to the family. Margaret held Elias for a long time without speaking. Mama Nwosu hugged Adiz and said something in her ear that made Adiz close her eyes briefly and nod. Chidi shook Elias's hand and then pulled him in and held him the way men hold each other when words are insufficient. Blessing kissed Adiz on both cheeks and told Emeka he was the most serious 5-year-old she had ever met, and Emeka accepted this assessment with complete agreement. They drove back to Surulere in the early evening. The flat was as they had left it that morning. The curtains Adiz had sewn moved softly in the breeze from the window she always left slightly open. Mrs. Fashola's radio played faintly through the wall. The refrigerator hummed its loud, familiar hum. Emeka ran to his small room and came back with a drawing he had left on his bed, a picture of the three of them standing in front of a house, the house not grand, just a rectangle with a door and 2 windows, the 3 figures holding hands underneath it. He gave it to Elias. Elias held the drawing and could not speak. Adiz made tea on the two-burner cooker. She brought 2 cups to the small table and sat across from Elias the way she had sat across from him on the night 10 months ago when she had asked if he was healthy and then made tea and told him they would figure it out. The cups were the same cups. The table was the same table. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. She opened the notepad. She read for a long time. Not every page, but enough. Her face was quiet while she read. Occasionally she stopped and looked up at nothing, processing something she had found on a page. Then she went back to reading. When she finished, she closed it carefully and set it on the table between them. She said, "You wrote that I was teaching you." She said, "You were?" She said, "What did you learn?" He thought about this for a long time before he answered. He said, "I learned that I confused building things for people with loving them. That I thought providing was the same as being present. That I measured my value to this family in the wrong currency for a very long time." He said, "I learned that the most expensive thing in my life costs nothing and cannot be acquired. It can only be recognized." Adiz looked at him across the table. She said, "That is a good answer." She picked up her tea. He picked up his. Outside the window, the street was doing what it always did in the evening. Children coming in from play. Traders closing their stalls. Someone's generator starting up against the coming dark. The ordinary sounds of a neighborhood that had held them for 10 months and asked nothing in return except that they live honestly inside it. Emeka climbed into Elias's lap and fell asleep between one breath and the next, his drawing still folded in his small fist. Elias held his son and looked at his wife across the narrow table in the small flat with the curtains she had sewn herself, moving in the warm evening air. He said, "I am sorry." She said, He said, "I will spend the rest of my life earning this." She looked at him with the steady eyes of a woman who has already decided and is simply waiting for the man in front of her to catch up to what she decided. She said, "I know that too." They sat together in the quiet. The fan turned. The radio played. The street settled into night. And in a flat in Surulere that would be emptied in the morning, a family that had been tested and found and broken and repaired sat together in the particular peace that only comes to people who have told each other the truth and chosen to remain. That was enough. That was everything.